Hello, boys and girls. My name is Katie O'Donoghue, and I'm the author and illustrator of the children's book, The Little Squirrel Who Worried. And I'm here today with the Kerry Library for the Ireland Reads campaign. And I'm going to share with you a selection of some of my favourite children's stories from Irish authors and publishers. So today, I have a wonderfully, fantastically fun story for you. And a bit of a clue might be my background. But the book we're going to read today is The Dead Zoo. It's written and illustrated by Peter Donnelly, and it's published by Gill Books. So make sure you're somewhere comfy, get those comfy pillows and cushions or blankets, and let's snuggle up and read. So let's begin. The Dead Zoo. Mr. Gray was a serious man. He kept his tie perfectly straight, his moustache perfectly combed, and an important bunch of keys on his hips the whole time. He owned a very old museum in the middle of a very big city. The people in the city called the museum the Dead Zoo. Inside, Mr. Gray kept a collection of stuffed animals. There was an elephant from Africa, a tiger from Bengal, and a great white shark from the Pacific Ocean. There were skeletons too, like a giant Irish elk, and even a dodo from Mauritius. Every day, children came to visit the museum, for Mr. Gray had some very strict rules. There was no talking, no laughing, no running about, and definitely no touching the animals. It would be fair to say that Mr. Gray didn't like people very much. In fact, he preferred the company of his stuffed animals. Yes, indeed, Mr. Gray was a very serious man. One evening, as Mr. Gray was preparing to lock up his museum, he heard an unusual sound coming from the corner of the hall. "Good heavens!" he screamed with horror. "A mouse!" Now, you and I know that a mouse is just a teeny, weeny, furry animal that could live happily inside a very old museum. But to Mr. Gray, a real live creature did not belong in the Dead Zoo. Animals were supposed to be still and quiet and stuffed. On hearing Mr. Gray scream, the little mouse darted across the wooden floorboards and through the hallway. Mr. Gray set off in a pursuit, grabbing the first thing he could find, his large butterfly net. His long legs leapt into action, but the mouse was much too fast for him. She sped towards the African elephant, running up its long trunk, across its enormous back and down its short tail, before landing safely on the head of a stuffed duck. Next, Mr. Gray almost caught the little mouse as she skipped across a giant walrus, but once again, she escaped just in time. Aha, thought Mr. Gray, as he noticed her scurrying towards a cabinet of tiny mammals. He would surely catch her this time, but he just could not spot her. I could have sworn that pesky mouse was hiding here somewhere. Mr. Gray just had a moment to catch his breath when he heard the rattle of tiny feet above him. There was the little mouse standing proudly on top of a great Irish elk. Mr. Gray swung his net, but alas, it got tangled on the giant antlers. This mouse was becoming a real nuisance. Once again, Mr. Gray found himself chasing the mouse across the museum floor. This time she weaved beneath the belly of a large rhinoceros, then turned sharply around a family of squirrel monkeys until she skidded towards the back of the room, trapped. Finally, Mr. Gray had a big chance. But as he raised his net and prepared to pounce, his keys fell from his hip and bounced between a crack in the floorboards. Now that his keys were lost, how would he ever lock up his museum? Mr. Gray looked at the mouse, and the mouse looked back at Mr. Gray. There was a moment of silence. Then, quick as a flash, the little mouse jumped into the crack and disappeared from sight. Mr. Gray waited anxiously as the minutes passed. Suddenly, the little mouse popped her head up through the crack in the floorboards and she was holding Mr. Gray's keys. He reached down and took them from her tiny hands. Thank you, he mumbled. You know what? Maybe having a little friend like a mouse wouldn't be a bad idea after all. She could help Mr. Gray keep his museum nice and clean, reaching all the places he couldn't. She could dust the tall antlers, shine the small cabinets, and even help him find his keys if he ever lost them again. In return, Mr. Gray's new friend could live in the museum for as long as she wanted. This made the little mouse smile, and it made Mr. Gray smile too. It felt good to smile and have a friend. From that day on, every time the children came to visit the museum, Mr. Gray and the mouse would welcome them with open arms. The Dead Zoo became a wonderful place, full of fun and games. Mr. Gray was now happy to let the children enjoy his museum and to talk, laugh, run about, and hang on, wait a minute. No, there was no touching the animals. He was still serious about that rule. The end. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the story of the Dead Zoo. I thought it was fantastically fun. And what we're going to do next is, if we can all grab a piece of paper and maybe get some pens, pencils, whatever you have handy. And I'd like you to think, have you ever been to a zoo, a dead zoo, or a real live zoo? And if you have, or maybe even if you haven't, what would be your favorite animal to see? And if you could, I'd like you to draw your favorite animals from the zoo. Make sure to send in your art to the Kerry Library because we'd love to see your fantastic artwork. I hope you've all enjoyed today's story, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.